Dr. Amelia Carter realized something was wrong the second the operating room doors closed behind her. The surgery had ended 20 minutes ago, but nobody else had left. The patient was already gone. The nurses were gone. Even the interns had disappeared from the hallway outside. Yet, Dr. Victor Blackwood remained, standing across the room silently removing his gloves, one finger at a time, while Amelia cleaned surgical instruments at the stainless steel counter, trying not to notice how quiet the room had suddenly become. The overhead operating lights still burned bright above them, washing the room in cold white light. Amelia could hear her own breathing through the surgical mask. Blackwood finally looked at her for the first time all night. "You handled yourself well in there," he said calmly. Amelia forced a polite smile. Compliments from him were rare in Saint Katherine Medical Center. Residents talked about Dr. Blackwood, the way soldiers talked about commanders during war. Brilliant, untouchable, dangerous. His approval could build careers overnight. His disappointment could destroy them even faster. Amelia lowered her eyes back to the surgical tray, but she could still feel him watching her. Not like a teacher, not like a surgeon reviewing performance. Something about the silence felt wrong, too personal, too heavy. Then she noticed the operating room security camera above the door slowly tilt away from them. Amelia frowned slightly. Hospitals never disabled cameras during post-op cleanup, especially not in surgical theaters. Blackwood saw her notice it and smiled, a small smile. Calm, controlled, unsettling. "Relax," he said softly while stepping closer. "Nobody's recording anymore." Amelia's stomach tightened instantly. The room suddenly felt smaller. The bright surgical lights now felt blinding instead of professional. Blackwood removed the rest of his gloves carefully and dropped them onto the tray beside her. "You know," he continued quietly, "most residents spend years trying to impress me." Amelia stayed silent. Something deep inside her was already telling her to leave. But leaving wasn't simple inside St. Katherine. Not when your residency approval sat in the hands of one man. Blackwood slowly walked around the surgical table while Amelia subconsciously stepped backward until her lower back touched the metal counter behind her. "The board trusts my judgment," he said. "If I recommend someone, doors open." His eyes moved across her face slowly before he added, "And if I don't." He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. Amelia's heartbeat became painfully loud inside her chest. Somewhere outside the operating room, a patient monitor beeped faintly in the distance, but inside the room, everything felt frozen. Then Blackwood reached past her shoulder toward the cabinet behind her and quietly locked the operating room door. He lock clicked softly behind her, but inside Amelia's chest it sounded deafening. She turned slowly toward the operating room door, while Dr. Victor Blackwood stood, only a few feet away, watching her reaction with unsettling calmness. The bright surgical lights reflected sharply across the steel instruments between them, turning the room cold and almost unreal. Amelia tried forcing herself to stay composed. Hospitals were intense places. Surgeons were strange people. Maybe she was overthinking everything, but deep inside, her instincts were already screaming. Blackwood walked back toward the operating table slowly, removing his surgical cap while speaking casually, as if nothing unusual had happened. "You know how competitive permanent residency positions are, don't you?" Amelia swallowed carefully before nodding. "Yes, sir." Blackwood gave a faint smile. "Good, then, you understand how valuable tonight could be for you." Amelia felt her stomach tighten again. Something about the way he said valuable made her skin crawl. He leaned lightly against the operating table while studying her face in silence for several seconds. Amelia suddenly became hyper-aware of herself, the loose strands of hair falling around her face, the exhaustion in her eyes, the sweat beneath her scrubs after 14 hours inside surgery. Blackwood's eyes moved slowly over her, like he was evaluating something far more personal than medical performance. "You're talented," he finally said quietly, "but talent alone doesn't guarantee survival in this hospital." Amelia forced herself to respond professionally. "I'm willing to work harder." Blackwood chuckled softly. "That's what all residents say." The room fell silent again, except for the faint hum of surgical ventilation above them. Amelia glanced toward the door subconsciously. Blackwood noticed immediately. "Relax," he said calmly. "If I wanted to hurt your career, Amelia, I wouldn't need a locked door to do it." Her heartbeat stumbled painfully. He said it so casually, so confidently, like he knew exactly how powerless she really was here. Blackwood picked up her residency evaluation file from the counter nearby. "Your surgical scores are impressive," he continued. "Patients like you, nurses, respect you. The board already sees potential." Amelia stayed silent. She should have felt relieved hearing those words. Instead, she felt trapped by them. Blackwood slowly flipped through the file, without looking down. But hospitals like Saint Katherine don't run on scores. He finally looked directly into her eyes again. They run on loyalty. Amelia felt pressure building behind her ribs. I don't understand. Blackwood smiled slightly. You will. He walked toward her again slowly, controlled, almost gentle. That calmness frightened her more than anger would have. Outside the operating room, thunder rolled faintly beyond the hospital windows. Rain had started somewhere over the city. Amelia suddenly realized how isolated the surgical wing felt at night. Almost nobody came here after midnight unless called for emergencies. Blackwood stopped beside her near the instrument counter, close enough now that she could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne beneath antiseptic hospital chemicals. Residents spend years trying to earn my trust, he said quietly. Some fail before they even understand the game. Amelia's hands tightened unconsciously against the steel counter edge. Blackwood's expression barely changed. This hospital rewards people who know how to cooperate. The word cooperate hit her harder than it should have. Something hidden inside the way he said it made her pulse spike again. Amelia carefully stepped sideways, creating a little distance between them. Blackwood noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. But instead of reacting aggressively, he simply smiled again. Calm, patient, predatory. You're nervous, he observed softly. Amelia tried forcing professionalism back into her voice. It's late. I have another shift at 6. Blackwood laughed quietly under his breath. You still think this conversation is about schedules? His words settled into the room like poison. Amelia looked toward the operating room door again. She hated herself for doing it because it revealed fear, and somehow she knew men like Blackwood fed on fear. Blackwood followed her gaze calmly before walking toward the wall-controlled panel. With one movement, half the surgical lights dimmed. The room immediately changed. Shadows stretched across the floor. The atmosphere became heavier, more intimate, more dangerous. Amelia's throat tightened. Sir, Blackwood interrupted gently. Do you know why St. Catherine's residents never report anything? Amelia froze. The question felt wrong immediately. Blackwood leaned lightly against the counter beside her again. Because deep down, he continued quietly, they understand how replaceable they are. Amelia felt anger rise beneath her fear now. If this meeting isn't about residency performance, then what is it about? For the first time all night, Blackwood's smile disappeared completely. The silence between them became suffocating. Then he reached slowly into his coat pocket and placed a thin black hotel keycard onto the steel counter between them. Amelia stared at it without breathing. Blackwood's voice dropped almost to a whisper. Your future evaluation is tomorrow morning. He slid the card slightly closer to her. But tonight tells me everything I need to know about your loyalty. Amelia stared at the black keycard on the steel counter, as if touching it might destroy her entire life. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The distant sound of thunder echoed faintly outside Saint Katherine Medical Center while the operating room remained frozen in oppressive silence. Blackwood watched her carefully, almost clinically, like he was studying a patient's reaction under pressure. Amelia's chest tightened painfully. She had spent 6 years sacrificing sleep, relationships, and every piece of normal life chasing this career. Medical school debt still followed her like a shadow. Her mother back in Chicago worked double shifts at a pharmacy just to help her survive residency. Everything in her life had led to this hospital. And now one man stood calmly in front of her, reducing all of it into something filthy and unspoken. Amelia finally forced herself to speak. You can't be serious. Blackwood didn't even blink. I'm completely serious. His calmness terrified her more than shouting ever could. There was no guilt in his voice, no hesitation, only certainty, like this conversation had happened many times before. Amelia slowly stepped away from the counter, her pulse roaring in her ears. This is insane. Blackwood crossed his arms casually. No, Amelia. What's insane is believing hospitals like this are built on fairness. She shook her head in disbelief. You're asking me to. I'm offering you an opportunity, he interrupted smoothly. Amelia felt physically sick. Blackwood walked toward the large operating room windows overlooking the sleeping city skyline. Rain streaked against the glass under distant red emergency lights from ambulances below. Do you know how many residents apply here every year? He asked quietly without turning around. Amelia said nothing. Thousands, he answered himself. Only a few survive long enough to become permanent staff. He finally turned back toward her slowly. The smart ones understand how power works. Amelia's eyes burned with anger now. This isn't power, this is abuse. Blackwood's expression remained perfectly controlled. Careful, one word, .com/soft, dangerous. Amelia immediately realized how vulnerable she truly was here. Her evaluation, her surgical future, everything passed through him before reaching the board. Blackwood walked back toward the table and picked up her residency file again. You know what happens when residents become difficult? He asked. Amelia stayed silent. Schedules change, opportunities disappear, surgical mistakes suddenly receive more attention. He flipped another page casually. Some residents simply don't get renewed. Amelia's throat tightened. He wasn't threatening her emotionally anymore. He was explaining the system that somehow made it worse. Blackwood stopped flipping through the file and looked directly at her again. Nobody becomes successful in hospitals like Saint Katherine by pretending morality matters more than survival. Amelia felt trapped between rage and fear. Every instinct told her to grab the keycard and throw it across the room. Another part of her wanted to run straight to human resources, but deep down, she already understood something horrifying. Men like Blackwood survived because institutions protected them. Hospitals protected reputation before truth, especially hospitals with billionaire donors and nationally famous surgeons. Blackwood studied her silence carefully. You're not the first resident to sit where you're standing. Amelia looked at him sharply. How many? For the first time, Blackwood smiled again, but now the smile felt colder. Enough to know which ones become successful. Amelia's stomach dropped. Suddenly, every strange interaction during the past year replayed differently inside her head. Residents quietly crying inside stairwells, nurses warning new employees about certain late-night meetings, female residents suddenly transferring hospitals without explanation. The silence around Blackwood wasn't fear anymore. It was survival culture. Amelia realized something even worse than everyone already knew, and nobody stopped it. Her breathing became shallow. Why are you telling me this so openly? Blackwood shrugged lightly. Because once people reach this level of ambition, they usually choose their future over their pride. The sentence hit her like ice water. Amelia stared at the keycard again. Black, elegant, expensive hotel logo embossed in silver. Blackwood gently pushed it closer once more. Tomorrow morning, he said softly, the board will ask for my recommendation. Amelia felt tears threatening behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. Blackwood stepped closer again, lowering his voice, almost sympathetically now. You're brilliant, Amelia. Truly, I'd hate to see potential wasted because of unnecessary idealism. The manipulation in his tone made her skin crawl. He spoke like a mentor protecting her career, while slowly cornering her psychologically. Amelia finally looked directly into his eyes. And if I refuse? The room became silent again. Blackwood held her gaze for several seconds before answering calmly. Then life continues. Amelia waited. For everyone except you. Her heart dropped. Blackwood placed her residency file back onto the counter carefully. Residents disappear from programs every year. Burnout, mental health, performance concerns. Hospitals always have explanations ready. Amelia suddenly understood why nobody fought him, because fighting him meant gambling your entire future against a man the institution worshipped. Blackwood checked the expensive silver watch on his wrist. You have until midnight tomorrow. He nodded toward the key. Suici 1908. Amelia felt disgust crash through her chest so violently she could barely breathe. Blackwood walked toward the operating room door and unlocked it calmly, like nothing unusual had happened. Before leaving, he looked back at her one final time. One more thing, Amelia. She said nothing. The residents who cooperate, he gave a faint smile, usually become doctors. People remember. Then, he walked out, leaving Amelia alone beside the surgical table, staring at the black keycard while the operating room lights buzzed faintly overhead. And for the first time since entering Saint Katherine Medical Center, she seriously considered destroying her own career just to escape what this place really was. Amelia didn't sleep that night. She sat alone inside the residents' locker room, long after Blackwood disappeared from the surgical wing. Staring at the black hotel keycard resting beside her phone like it was something radioactive. Every few minutes she thought about throwing it away. Every few minutes she stopped herself. That terrified her most. Not the keycard itself, not even Blackwood, but the fact that fear had already started changing the way she thought. Outside the locker room, Saint Katherine Medical Center slowly woke into another brutal morning. Stretchers rolled through corridors. Nurses changed shifts. Coffee machines buzzed endlessly while exhausted residents dragged themselves through another 16-hour cycle, pretending their lives still belonged to them. Amelia sat frozen, listening to the hospital breathe around her like a giant machine feeding on people too desperate to leave. Her phone vibrated suddenly. Board review, 2:09 a.m. Her stomach tightened immediately. She looked at the clock. 8:12, less than an hour. Amelia splashed cold water against her face, inside the locker room sink, and forced herself to breathe normally. She looked terrible. Pale skin, red eyes, exhaustion written across every inch of her expression. She barely recognized herself anymore. By the time she entered the hospital conference floor, her chest already felt heavy enough to collapse her lungs. The executive hallway looked nothing like the rest of the hospital. Everything here was polished marble, soft lighting, expensive artwork, and artificial calmness. The suffering downstairs never reached these floors. Amelia noticed Daniel Reeves standing near the conference room coffee station, pretending to scroll through his phone. The second he saw her face, his expression changed. "You look awful," he whispered quietly. Amelia forced a weak smile. "Long night." Daniel hesitated. "You met with him, didn't you?" Amelia stayed silent. That silence answered everything. Daniel looked down immediately, like he regretted asking. "Amelia." He lowered his voice further. "You should just stay careful." Amelia stared at him in disbelief. "That's it." Daniel's jaw tightened, nervously. "You think nobody's tried reporting him before?" Amelia felt anger rising instantly. "So everyone just accepts it." Daniel looked around the hallway anxiously before stepping closer. 3 years ago there was another resident, Lauren Mitchell, top of her class, brilliant surgeon. Amelia listened silently. She filed complaints. Amelia's heartbeat slowed painfully. "What happened?" Daniel laughed bitterly under his breath. "Performance investigations, mental health concerns, rumors about medication abuse." Amelia felt cold all over. Were any of them true? Daniel looked directly into her eyes for the first time. "Does it matter?" The conference room doors suddenly opened nearby, interrupting them. Several senior doctors walked out laughing, casually, while board members shook hands beside them. Wealth, influence, reputation. Amelia suddenly realized Saint Katherine wasn't a hospital anymore. It was an ecosystem protecting powerful people from consequences. Daniel stepped backward immediately, creating distance between them, as if even this conversation was dangerous. "I'm sorry," he muttered quietly before walking away. Amelia stood frozen, alone in the executive hallway, while fear slowly transformed into something darker. Rage. At exactly 9 a.m., the conference room assistant opened the doors for her politely. "Dr. Carter, the board is ready." Amelia walked inside, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. 6 people sat around the polished conference table, reviewing files and tablets. Expensive suits, calm expressions, professional smiles. And sitting directly at the center beside the chairman was Dr. Victor Blackwood, completely relaxed, completely untouchable. He looked at Amelia with the exact same calm smile from the operating room. No tension, no guilt, like last night had never happened. "Dr. Carter," the chairman greeted warmly. "Please sit." Amelia obeyed mechanically. The review meeting began immediately. Questions about patient outcome, surgical response times, academic performance. Amelia answered automatically, while trying not to look at Blackwood. Then, something strange happened. The board members started praising her aggressively. Excellent emergency response scores. Exceptional composure during trauma cases. Fastest surgical adaptation we've seen this year. Amelia felt confused. Blackwood hadn't destroyed her evaluation, not yet. The chairman smiled warmly across the table. "Frankly, Dr. Carter, your future here looks very promising." Amelia's eyes shifted unintentionally toward Blackwood. He leaned back calmly in his chair, watching her reaction like a man holding invisible strings. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes before the chairman finally closed Amelia's file. "There's only one remaining factor before permanent placement recommendations," he explained casually. "Dr. Blackwood's personal assessment." The room suddenly felt airless. Amelia's pulse exploded inside her chest. Every board member turned toward Blackwood expectantly. He remained silent for several seconds, deliberately creating tension. Then he smiled. "Dr. Carter has extraordinary potential." Amelia felt temporary relief hit her so suddenly it almost hurt. But Blackwood wasn't finished. However, the word sliced through the room softly. "Potential and trust are 2 different things." Amelia's stomach dropped instantly. Blackwood folded his hands together calmly. "In Saint Katherine, we value residents who understand loyalty, discretion, and institutional culture. Amelia realized he was speaking directly to her, while everyone else heard something completely different. Corporate language, hidden threats wrapped in professionalism. The chairman nodded thoughtfully. Of course. Blackwood finally looked directly at Amelia again. I believe Dr. Carter still has an important decision to make regarding her future here. Her breathing stopped. Nobody else at the table reacted. Nobody else understood. Or maybe they did, and simply chose silence. The chairman smiled politely. Well then, we look forward to your final recommendation, Victor. Victor, not Dr. Blackwood. Victor. Amelia suddenly saw how close these people really were. This wasn't oversight. This was protection. The meeting finally ended. As board members gathered their tablets and files, Blackwood stood slowly beside Amelia's chair. Without looking directly at her, he spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. Midnight tomorrow. Then he walked away, smiling calmly, while executives shook his hand like he was the greatest surgeon in America. Amelia remained sitting alone at the conference table long after everyone else left, because for the first time, she realized escaping Saint Katherine might already be impossible. Amelia walked out of the executive conference room feeling like the entire hospital had changed shape around her. The same polished floors, the same doctors, the same fluorescent lights, but now everything felt contaminated by something invisible. Every smile looked fake. Every compliment sounded dangerous. Every hallway suddenly felt like part of a system designed to protect men like Victor Blackwood. She stepped into the elevator alone and pressed the button for the residence floor. But before the doors closed completely, a hand stopped them. Elena Brooks entered quietly, holding patient files against her chest. For several seconds neither woman spoke. The elevator descended slowly through the hospital, while soft instrumental music played overhead like some cruel joke pretending everything inside Saint Katherine was normal. Elena finally looked at Amelia's face and immediately understood. He asked you to, she whispered. Amelia's heartbeat froze. The elevator suddenly felt too small. Elena looked down instantly as if regretting the words the second they escaped her mouth. Forget it. Amelia grabbed her arm before the elevator doors opened. No, tell me. Elena hesitated for several painful seconds before speaking quietly. You think you're the first resident he's cornered. Amelia felt anger flare again. Then why does nobody stop him? Elena laughed softly, but there was no humor in it, only exhaustion. Because Saint Katherine isn't a hospital anymore, it's a business. The elevator doors opened onto the ICU floor. Elena stepped out first, but Amelia followed her immediately through the hallway. Please, Amelia pressed. I need to understand what's happening. Elena stopped near an empty nurse's station and looked around carefully before speaking. 5 years ago, one of our residents filed a formal complaint against Blackwood. Amelia listened silently. The hospital buried it within 48 hours. How? Elena's expression hardened. Money, reputation, lawyers. Same way powerful people always survive. Amelia's chest tightened. Elena lowered her voice further. The resident disappeared 3 months later. Amelia's stomach dropped. Disappeared. Transferred officially, Elena corrected quietly, but everyone knew what really happened. Amelia leaned against the counter, trying to steady herself. And nobody talks. Elena looked directly into her eyes. People here have mortgages, families, student loans, careers they spent decades building. She paused. Fear makes people obedient. Amelia suddenly understood why everyone in the hospital looked emotionally numb all the time. It wasn't exhaustion anymore. It was survival. Elena glanced toward the hallway anxiously before continuing. Blackwood chooses people carefully. Residents with debt. Residents desperate for approval. Residents who can't afford to fight back. Amelia felt physically sick hearing herself described so accurately. Elena's expression softened slightly. You remind me of Lauren Mitchell. Amelia immediately remembered Daniel mentioning the name earlier. What happened to her really? Elena stayed silent for a moment too long. She tried fighting him publicly. Amelia waited. Then the hospital accused her of emotional instability. Rage exploded inside Amelia's chest. That's insane. Elena nodded slowly. That's power. The ICU alarms beeped softly somewhere deeper in the corridor, while nurses moved quickly between patient rooms, pretending not to hear the conversation. Even now, people avoided looking directly at them. Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice almost to a whisper. Do you know the worst part? Amelia shook her head. Blackwood probably believes he's helping people. Amelia frowned in disbelief. Elena gave a tired smile filled with disgust. Men like him convince themselves that ambition always has a price. Amelia suddenly remembered the black hotel keycard still hidden inside her locker. Her pulse spiked instantly. Alina noticed the expression on her face immediately. He gave you something, didn't he? Amelia didn't answer. Alina already knew. Don't carry it around, Alina whispered urgently. If anyone loyal to him sees it, rumors start fast. Amelia stared at her. This hospital actually protects him that deeply. Alina looked around the ICU slowly. Half the executives owe their careers to Blackwood. The other half are terrified of scandal. Amelia suddenly realized something horrifying. Saint Katherine Medical Center wasn't failing to stop corruption. The corruption itself had become part of the institution. A young nurse walked past them nervously before quickly disappearing into a patient room. Alina lowered her voice again. Listen to me carefully. Whatever decision you make it fast. Amelia's throat tightened. Why? Alina looked genuinely frightened for the first time. Because once Blackwood becomes emotionally interested in someone, things escalate. Amelia felt cold all over. Escalate how? Alina hesitated. More pressure, more isolation, more control. Amelia could barely breathe now. Why are you telling me all this? Elena's eyes filled briefly with emotion before she looked away. Because nobody warned Lauren. Silence settled heavily between them. Then suddenly Amelia's phone vibrated inside her coat pocket. Unknown number. Her stomach immediately dropped. Slowly, she answered, "Hello." For several seconds, only silence answered back. Then, Victor Blackwood's calm voice spoke softly through the phone. "You shouldn't discuss private meetings with hospital staff." Amelia, her blood turned cold instantly. Amelia looked around the ICU corridor in panic. Someone was watching. Somewhere inside Saint Katherine, someone was always watching. Blackwood continued calmly. Loyalty becomes very difficult when trust is broken. The call disconnected immediately. Amelia stood frozen, holding the phone against her ear, while Elena's face slowly drained of color. Because now they both understood the same terrifying truth. This hospital didn't just protect. For the rest of the day, Amelia felt like someone was following her through every hallway inside Saint Katherine Medical Center. Not physically close enough to see clearly, but always there. Every time she looked up from patient charts, someone suddenly looked away. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Nurses lowered their voices. Residents avoided standing near her too long. The hospital no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a controlled environment where fear moved silently between people like infection. By 8:40 p.m., Amelia sat alone inside the residence lounge, staring at the black hotel keycard resting on the table in front of her again. Suite 1908, midnight. She had spent the entire day convincing herself she wouldn't go, but every time she imagined refusing, she saw her future collapsing piece by piece. Years of medical school debt, endless sleepless nights, her mother crying proudly during graduation, the sacrifices, the exhaustion, the identity she built around becoming a surgeon. Blackwood understood exactly what he was threatening because hospitals like Saint Katherine turned careers into emotional prisons. Amelia rubbed her trembling hands together, trying to breathe normally. Then the lounge television suddenly flashed breaking news across the screen. Saint Katherine Medical Center ranked #1 surgical program in the country. Blackwood's face appeared immediately beside the headline, while reporters praised his leadership and innovation. Amelia stared at the screen in disbelief. The same man terrifying residents behind closed doors was being celebrated publicly as a national hero. The contrast made her physically nauseous. The residence lounge door opened quietly behind her. Daniel Reeves stepped inside carrying coffee, but the second he noticed the keycard on the table, his face changed completely. "Jesus," he whispered. Amelia looked at him, emotionally exhausted. "Tell me honestly, has anyone ever beaten him?" Daniel stayed silent. That silence answered everything. Amelia laughed bitterly under her breath. "Of course not." Daniel sat across from her carefully. "Amelia, people survive here by staying invisible. That's not surviving." Daniel looked down at his coffee cup. "Maybe not, but it's safer." Amelia's eyes burned with anger and humiliation. "You all know what he's doing." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, and nobody stops him." Daniel's jaw tightened painfully. "You think I'm proud of that?" The room fell silent again. Finally, Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You need to understand something. Blackwood isn't just protected because he's powerful." Amelia waited. "He knows things about everyone." Amelia frowned. Daniel glanced toward the closed lounge door nervously. "Executives, donors, doctors, affairs, drug problems, illegal malpractice settlements." Amelia felt cold again. "He keeps leverage. Daniel nodded slowly. That's how people like him survive forever. Amelia looked at the keycard again, realizing this situation was much bigger than personal corruption. Saint Katherine itself had become dependent on silence. At 11:12 p.m., Amelia finally stood from the table. Daniel looked up immediately. Where are you going? Amelia slipped the keycard into her coat pocket slowly. I don't know yet. Daniel grabbed her wrist before she could leave. Whatever happens tonight, don't let him isolate you emotionally. Amelia looked at him sadly. I think he already has. The hotel stood only 4 blocks from Saint Katherine, hidden between luxury office towers downtown. Rain covered the streets in reflections of red brake lights and neon signs, while Amelia walked alone beneath the dark skyline, feeling like every step toward the building erased another piece of herself. By the time she entered the hotel lobby, her heartbeat had become almost unbearable. Everything inside the building smelled expensive. Marble floors, golden lighting, quiet jazz music, wealth disguised as comfort. The receptionist barely looked at her before nodding toward the elevators. That terrified her more than anything. This wasn't unusual here. She stepped into the elevator alone and pressed the button for the 19th floor. As the doors closed, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls. Exhausted eyes, tense posture, fear hidden beneath professionalism. For one brief second, she almost turned back, but then she heard Blackwood's voice again inside her head. Residents disappear from programs every year. The elevator doors opened slowly onto a silent, luxury hallway. Suite 1908 waited at the very end beneath dim golden lights. Amelia walked toward it mechanically, while every survival instinct inside her screamed to run. When she finally reached the door, she froze completely. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands trembled violently. Then she noticed something unexpected. The hotel room door was slightly open already. Amelia frowned in confusion. Soft light spilled into the hallway from inside the suite. For several seconds she stood motionless, listening carefully. Voices, more than one. Her heartbeat stopped. Slowly, Amelia pushed the door open wider, and the moment she looked inside the suite, her entire understanding of Saint Katherine Medical Center shattered completely. Because Victor Blackwood wasn't alone. Inside the room sat 3 senior hospital executives, 2 famous surgeons from the board, and a young female resident Amelia recognized immediately from pediatrics. She looked emotionally destroyed. Nobody in the room appeared surprised to see Amelia standing there. Blackwood simply looked up from his whiskey glass calmly and smiled. Good, he said softly. Now you're finally seeing how this hospital really works.